Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews. Nearly said Stephen University then, Chris, not gonna lie.
Ooh.
That would have been that would have been disastrous. I mean, putting it out equally bad, but you know, we'll live with that. This week we are looking at Lady and the Tramp, 1955 animated film from the wonderful people over at Disney, the wonderful and culturally insensitive people at Disney.
We should return to that.
So, I mean, this is an interesting one for me for a couple of reasons. But I figured we should start. It's your suggestion, so I figured we start with you. What's your history with the film, Chris? How did you come across it? What are your memories of it?
Some twins along the road, Dan. I was a simple boy growing up in the UK. I liked Power Rangers. I liked G-strings, and I also remember I really liked at least the spaghetti scene of Lady and the Tramp.
Right.
So basically, like, my memory, and I have confirmed this when we were watching it with my sister, was that the two twins along the road had Lady and the Tramp on video, on VHS.
Sure.
And when round there hanging out, because they were kind of in, if memory serves, they were essentially in between. There's 3 years between me and my sister, and me and my sister each had a year in between us and the twins, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So school year wise, I'm in year 7, my sister's in year 10, and then the twins are
8 or 9.
8 or 9, yeah. I think closer to me in age.
Sure.
But the dynamics worked quite well because they were closer to me in age, but they were female, so you know they could bond with both of us quite nicely. So we'd hang out with them a lot, and they had this on VHS and we didn't, and I always wanted to borrow it, and I just remember vividly watching and loving and always being like, oh, the spaghetti scene, and talking about the spaghetti scene. I can only put that down to me being like soppy and romantic even then. Like, I have another really distinctive memory when I think I was in like year 4, so I'm what you're 11 in year 7, so 6, 5, 4, take away 3. I don't know. I'm like 6 or 7 years old, maybe younger, and like some lads, fucking yeah, they were drinking pints and chatting away. But like some of the boys were talking, and they were like, "Oh, can you imagine like dating? Can you imagine being married? Oh, it's disgusting." And even then, I'm sat there like, "Yeah, I can imagine it." Like, I had a crush who went on to marry one of my best friends. Fun fact. I think I've mentioned that before. I had a crush from when I was like 4 years old. Like, I think I was just a soppy kid, and something about that notion of, you know, two people that from different sides shouldn't be together, or, you know, wouldn't be put together, but, you know, falling in love, that really resonated with me. And I just remember vividly always being excited for and waiting for that scene. And always borrowing the VHS from them. And my sister reckons we also always borrowed The Land Before Time, which I remember less, to be honest. And I think a different neighbour had that. And I'm kind of like, it was really weird because that was obviously when I was younger. Didn't ever own it ourselves. Apologies for the sniffing. And I kind of sat down to watch it going, well, I can only remember that scene. Like, I had so much warmth for the film, but only on the basis of that one scene. I couldn't tell you anything else about it. Like, but it is as discussed last time, when thinking about animated films from my childhood, it's the kind of the one that came to my mind, really. You know, I would have otherwise checked, you know, the other VHSs that we did have to see if there were any animated films in there, but can't. Still in lockdown, for those listening in the future, so can't do that. So yeah, big lover of that one scene, big remembrance of that one scene. Couldn't tell you a lot else. What about yourself?
Similar in that I didn't initially own a copy of this. I think I did acquire one at a later time. I think it was like a relative had a copy, so it was something we regularly watched when spending time at that relative's house, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my memories of it are similar in that there's very specific things that I remembered. My only memory of the spaghetti scene is that it's iconic. I don't actually remember the spaghetti scene, the context, all that stuff. What I did remember was the opening of this movie. The opening scenes with baby Lady, like the young version of Lady, scared and in a new place and growing to become comfortable, only to have that pulled out from under her. Those opening 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever that is, till the very obvious foreshadowing, were quite vivid. The rest of the movie was a really interesting watch for me because watching it this time, it was like I was sort of watching the movie about a minute ahead of what I was seeing with my own eyes, because it was coming back to me, but it wasn't coming back to me in swaths far ahead. Where I was seeing the next 3 or 4 scenes ahead. I was going, oh yeah, that's right. That's where this leads. It was literally like, oh, this is where they meet the beaver, and then the beaver would show up about 30 seconds later. Like it was that. I was sort of. It was all sort of coming back to me, but very, very I was in the fog and I could only see the slight bit of the road ahead. It was very, very surreal experience.
Isn't that interesting? Because I would, it's not a competition, obviously, but I'd argue out of the two of us, I had the more emotive story, or the film had resonated on a more emotional level. Yet for me, it was more like meeting a relative and getting told you've met before and kind of going, okay, yeah, maybe. Like there was something familiar about the beaver, but I didn't go, oh, this is the beaver, like, at all.
Yeah, well, it was when they were outside and they were trying to get in and she had that thing on her face. I said to Nanny, oh, there's a beaver with the weird speech impediment. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, they trick him. And she's like, what?
That beaver made
but
me
it was coming back to me, but like a minute ahead. Like that about it. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, I couldn't have at that point predicted the ending of the movie at all. That was gone. That memory was not available to me. But then 10 minutes later, I was then seeing the next 3 minutes. So it was weird, to be honest with you. It was quite a surreal experience. So it's clearly gone in and stuck at some point. But but it was in a weird corner of my brain that I was struggling to access. So it was a really weird experience rewatching it. But I remember having very fond feelings towards it, and I remember particularly feeling very connected to that lady's story of becoming comfortable somewhere and then having that rug pulled out from under you. And for those
that's because you moved about you weren't an army kid, but I know you moved Manchester, Ireland. You had a few.
Yeah, there's a real chance.
Not just different houses, but different countries.
Yeah, we moved an awful lot. We moved 3 or 4 times before the age of 7. Then we moved to Ireland. When we went to Ireland, we initially were staying with our grandparents, while my parents found a home for us. And then we moved twice. There was no stability at all. Then we came back, and then the same thing. We moved around. We stayed with my auntie when I first came back to England, and then we found our own place. And it wasn't until I was year 8, year 9 that we found a home that I then stayed in for the rest of my time. But most of my childhood, I was moving every other year.
If you take out uni, you by 13 had lived in more houses than I've lived in now. If you take out uni,
I mean, I literally
three from uni.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at 4 already, and I'm 8 years old. 5. Yeah, I get to about 8 or 9 before I'm the age of 10. Maybe 11.
Hold on, let me see.
So yeah, I'd never put it together that way, but you're absolutely right. That's probably it. That is I'd have to do the math exactly to work out the number of homes I stayed in. But there is probably a truth to that.
If I don't include uni, I've only lived in 5 places, and if you include uni, that list only goes up to 9.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
and that's all after the age of. Like, basically, my mum and dad are still living in the house that I grew up in, and my dad moved in there at 9 months old. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So for me, maybe you're right. Maybe that's why I connected with that so much. But those early scenes when she's in the home and she's like trying to find her place in it, and she's crying because she wants the comfort of the people who have been nice to her so far, and then she ends up sleeping on the bed. It's just this one night, and it skips forward, and then we see what her life is like, later on, and she's sort of settled in, and she has a routine. And then you sort of get the hint that that's about to be imploded. That all really stuck with me. Like the feeling of this movie stuck with me more than the plot points. And I think that might be. I'll be honest with you, Chris. Actually, I think all of this stuff we're talking about memories of this film. Can I posit a theory as to why we've both got such broken memories of this feature? It's because it's almost all the music, and I don't think I've ever meant. I've said stuff like that in the past about it's the music's like super important to this film. Without it, you don't get the same whatever. But let me tell you something: this movie doesn't work at all without the music. It's some of the most emotive music and some of the most perfectly pitched music I've ever seen in a film. I rewatching it, I was like, it's incredible how much that music makes you feel something when the script isn't doing it.
I think it's that, and it's not even like, and it to be clear for those that don't remember, and we'll get to whether we recommend in a minute and then go into spoilers. But it's not the songs. There's only actually like 2 or 3 songs.
Yeah.
It's the music.
Yes.
It's literally the instrumental music that backs up the scenes. I think it's that, and I think it also, like we talked about when we were talking about Home Alone v The Italian Job, the thing you most remember it for, the interactions between Lady and the Tramp, literally, it takes ages to get to that, and even then I would argue it takes ages to get to them out in the wild, eating the spaghetti and doing all that. Like that's a long time. It's quite slow pacing at the beginning. And I think I think you're right, it's the music, but I think that plays a part in it as well. In the same way that if you watched Home Alone as a kid and watched it now, you'd probably spend the first hour being like, when did we get to the marbles and shit?
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, right? So I have a funny feeling that if a movie is like, the plot is what really makes you feel something, I do think the plot sticks with you. And I think in a situation where the music really evokes a lot of the feelings of the film, I just think that the feelings remain because the music invoked those, but you don't remember how they got there story-wise. And I think that's why we ended up in this weird situation where we both feel like we really enjoyed this movie when we were younger, but neither of us could tell you what the exact plot was prior to sitting down and watching it. Whereas, for example, Aladdin, which I will have seen at a very similar age, despite their release disparity, I could have told you scene to scene, word for word almost. There was a point when I had Aladdin memorized top to bottom. And that's very different. And that's a different kind of connection to what Lady and the Tramp achieves. In terms of recommendations, I absolutely recommend this movie. I think this is a wonderful movie. It's got a huge issue we'll come to. And for those who don't know, there's a reason Disney Plus have put a warning at the top about some outdated cultural stereotypes that appear in the movie. It's an issue. But with those excluded, and I'm not saying we should be dismissing those, but just in terms of reviewing the film as a film, I think it's wonderful. I think it's beautifully animated. I think the music is wonderful. I think the story is very engaging. I think the characters managed to be engaging with very little time spent with most of them. There's something kind of charming about the world. The tone, you get weirdly invested. There's some weird story beats, I think, but like on the whole, I would absolutely recommend this film to anyone. I think this is a classic for a reason.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you about the cultural stuff, and I think the other big discussion is some story decisions, some script decisions are incredibly 1950s, whilst some are also incredibly modern. We'll talk about it in the spoilers, but they did some stuff that I was like, oh, that seems a strange decision, but it does allow you to do this, and like some, where where a modern approach would be to go down a different route, you don't quite get the emotional payoff if you go down that route. So I think there's some really interesting stuff from a story perspective. It does not feel like something that was animated in 1955. It's an old animation style, of course. It doesn't look like flipping Paw Patrol or Monsters, Inc. or whatever. But equally, you know, this doesn't feel like it was made over 10 years before The Italian Job. No, wait, it's less than 10 years, isn't it? Wasn't The Italian Job 63? Or was The Italian Job 69? I can't remember.
69, I think.
69. So yeah, over 10 years before.
Well, yeah, but keep in mind it's also a period piece because it's set in 1903.
Exactly, which helps. Which does, you know, there's that the quote from the writers of Dad's Army. I think the quote is something like, "If you want your sitcom to be timeless, set it in the past because then it never looks outdated." So that will undoubtedly help that. But in general, I think it's emotive. I think the core of the story, you know, is still being seen in places and, you know, resonates. You know, in some ways, it's Romeo and Juliet. And I think that it is such an interesting history lesson. You know, the cultural stuff is absolutely wrong, and for reasons we talk about, I'd also argue that you could delete that scene. But I kind of think, well, you know, fair play to Disney for owning it, and it stands as a testament to history and of what we shouldn't become again, and what, you know, certain external forces would, you know, the dangers of them, the dangers of, you know, it's like, I think that approach of there's some stuff in this that's wrong, but it did happen, and here it is. Like, you know, there is an argument of, well, maybe if it can be cut, it should just be cut. But I think you got to look at where history went wrong to avoid the future going wrong as well. Do you know what I mean? Like without getting too political, the danger of Trump saying the sentences he's said about, you know, females and, you know, grab them by the whatever. The danger of that is that it's normalizing sexist behavior and this kind of crass, horrible language. And I think it suddenly, if you cut that out from history, then nobody can go, well, why are we going back to this? Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not sure I'm explaining that very well, but I think there's, even though that stuff is in there, actually watching it to go, fucking hell, Jesus, we got to make sure we avoid that shit. You know, does that make sense? The difficulty is it's fundamentally aimed at children, so, you know, it's a much bigger conversation about whether, well, would a child appreciate that the lesson is don't do that, in the same way that, you know, people have viewed some art in the wrong way, you know, even now. As a moment in animation history, I think it's absolutely on that basis alone worth watching, let alone the fact that it does a lot of things really well and interestingly, and the music and the animation is really great.
I think it's we can't for lack of a better term here, whitewash our history. We can't pretend we weren't racists, because we learnt lessons from from cultural racism. We learnt.
All right, Dan. Fuck you, all right? I rambled for 10 minutes trying to make a point, and you're like, here you go, Chris, this is the sentence you were after.
That's not what I was going for, but sure. I was simply echoing what you said, because I agree. I think you're right. Like, you know, to pretend it didn't happen would be to ensure we don't continue to learn those lessons going forward. I think Disney have handled it perfectly by putting it out there, but then putting a little warning on it rather than just, you know, not releasing it or changing it. There's a line, I think, though, that somewhere there when something, because like, I was saying this to Nadia, because me and Nadia were talking about this earlier today, and I was like, it's the East Asian thing is really strong in this. It's very, very problematic. They've got the Siamese cats. They've got the sort of they're conniving. They've got physically, in terms of their design, they've got sort of slanted eyes, which is obviously a cartoony sort of way of portraying Asian, particularly East Asian people. They're kind of conniving and evil. They use broken English. They're this horrendous East Asian stereotype. And Nadia was sort of saying like, oh yeah, but this movie's full of them. Like there's the Italian stereotype, there's the Irish stereotype. Yeah. I was like, yes, but this one's different because okay, so the Mexican guy, the Mexican dogs, the joke is his cousin, I think, has like a really long Mexican sounding name. You know, she's like Juanitas or something, right? Okay. Right. Okay. That's a little bit insensitive, is it? But I mean, it's just pointing out that there are some longer names. It's not really, even if that stereotype turned out to be true, factually, like if you went through the phone book in Mexico and went, oh, statistically speaking, that's accurate. It's not offensive in the sense of you're not saying anything negative about the people. You're just pointing out something. Does that make sense? Like, yeah, the Italian stereotypes in this, they're just loud and a bit shouty. Well, that might, you know, even if that's true, that's... People call me loud and shouty. Do you know what I mean? Like, the aspersions cast on East Asians in this movie are way more serious and way more offensive.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I completely agree.
There's a line as well in terms of like, yes, we can't ignore our past, but there, I mean, for example, Song of the South, which is the one Disney refused to put up on Disney Plus, probably a good move. That one's...
Yeah, oh, completely. Yeah.
That one's real bad. And exposing children to that would not probably teach them a lesson, but would instead potentially put some stereotypes in their heads that shouldn't exist. Yeah. There is a concern, though. You've got a movie like this where they're okay, well, let's just step back a little bit. The reason this has happened, let's be honest, the reason this movie is full of cultural stereotyping is quite simply because there are a lot of characters in this movie, and it's very easy to set up a character and their personality if you just lean on a stereotype.
Well, especially when those characters as well. And by the way, let's say now, none of this is a defense. None of this is. It's just discussing the reasoning and how we got here.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, I would not defend these things at all. I think I think there were some really poor choices made during the making of this film in terms of sensitivity and stuff. But of course, a different time, so it's hard to judge.
I think the stereotype logic makes sense though, and also if you're going to, not only is there a lot of characters, your logic of if you've got a lot of characters, a stereotype is a quick win. You don't only have a lot of characters here, but you have talking animals, you have talking dogs. Yes. So you've got to do even more than you would usually to get the audience to know who that character is and see it.
Because if these were people, you'd dress them a certain way. You'd have them look a certain way visually to represent some stuff that might not be cultural. Yeah. Like, for example, okay, so if you wanted to make a character seem homeless and it was a person, you would have them wearing ragged clothes. They'd be maybe dirty. Maybe they'd have a beard. There's visual cues you can use for that sort of thing. How do you make a dog look homeless?
Yeah, exactly. And the dogs that they spend the most time with, Lady, Tramp, and the two neighbours, they're the least stereotyped of all of them. Like, there's certain upper class, middle class, lower class stereotypes going on, but there's not the offensive... country-based stereotypes, geographical stereotypes
all the other characters
that we
seem
see
to have.
Yeah, there's literally a Russian
dog
has.
called Boris.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dissect that further, we're both recommending. Do you want to give a very quick overview of the plot? So from this point, if you're tempted to check it out, please go check it out and then come back and listen to the rest of our analysis, because spoilers ahoy, starting with a summary of the plot from Daniel for those that have seen it, don't want to rewatch it, but can't really remember.
Yeah, there you go. So Lady and the Tramp is a story of a dog called Lady, particularly focuses on her. I think the initial conceit was about her, from what I've read, so that's how it ended up being sort of a bit more leaning towards her than Tramp. But basically she's a young pup that's purchased by this couple, Jim Deere and Darling. Is that right? Jim Deere and Darling? I've got it right. Because, of course, she doesn't know their real names because she only knows them as what they call each other.
Which is an example of the script being better than it has any right to be. That's a really clever idea.
Yeah, it's very clever. And basically, she becomes very comfortable at the house. She's very beloved. She has a routine. She has a really sweet life. But then they have a baby, and that starts to cause her to worry as they get a bit distracted by the baby, especially in the early days, because that's what happens, isn't it? When you first have a baby, it's very all-consuming until you sort of life really settles into the new routine of having a baby. The dog's starting to feel left out. She meets Tramp, who basically is a freewheeling dog that doesn't have a home. He doesn't have a collar. He just goes around and lives on the streets, and he's making a good life of it. And he sort of says to her, "Oh yeah, no, I know this thing. Oh, they're gonna have a baby. They're gonna ignore you." And he sort of convinces her that's the case. Shortly after they have the baby, and this is starting to look like it might be true, because of course she's not seeing the wider picture, they have to go away, and when they go away, which inexplicable, they've just had a baby. We'll talk about it, but weird choice. Aunt Sarah, I think, comes to stay, and there's an incident between her cats, Lady and the baby, that makes her take Lady to get a muzzle put on, and in the chaos of that being put on, Lady escapes and is a little bit lost, meets Tramp. They have a wonderful jaunt around the world as he tries to convince her that that's the better way to live. And in the end, she ends up getting captured, taken to the pound, but because she's registered and she has a collar, she has a license, they find her owners and she's returned to them. But she's mad at Tramp now. Plus, she's also found out he's a bit of a womanizer while she was in the pound. There's a really great song. We'll come back to it. It's very good. We should play a drinking game with this, by the way, when we say we'll come back to it. This podcast, the sentence we'll come back to it comes up so much.
Yeah, especially in this in particular, but yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Basically, Tramp comes back and tries to talk to her and sort of rekindle their relationship. Doesn't really work, but then she gets chained up outside and a rat tries to eat the baby. Tramp goes to save the baby. And at first they think Tramp did it. Then the parents get home and it all transpires that Tramp was saving the baby. Happily ever after, they adopt Tramp. Tramp lives with them in the house, and they have little Lady and Tramp babies.
So, because I sort of made us do that, because we were getting kind of into the weeds of the cats and the sort of the racism, that ending brings up a point I want to make up about that, which is what's crazy about it is it feels so incredibly unnecessary as well. Not just in its content, but literally functionally in the film, functionality wise in the film. So they kind of, that song is establishing them as the villain, but they are not then the villain at the end. As Dan just said, a rat tries to eat the baby. So you don't even have, you'd be better off either have them attacking the baby for some reason, a better reason than they want its milk, or you have the rat do the song, setting up why they're the villain. There's a lot of strange story choices in this. Some for the good, some for the better. We'll talk about that more later. But that's the other crazy thing about the cats. They're just there for that song, and that song's incredibly offensive.
Yeah, and as we all know, rats do just love to eat babies, don't they? Famously, those rats. Yeah, me and Nadia were watching it, just this rat has got a fucking mission. He's not just aimlessly wandering around causing rat havoc. He climbs up the thing, he looks back at Lady ha ha ha, I'm gonna eat that baby. Then he goes straight into the baby's bedroom. It's it is already decided it's going for the baby. And I don't know much about rats, but let me tell you, pretty sure.
What do you think would have been better? Maybe a snake? There's a wild snake, because then you kind of have a song, it's very villainous, and then, because, obviously, if I had a baby, I wouldn't want a rat to be in the same room as that baby, but I wouldn't be specifically worried that the rat was going to go for the baby. However, I would probably
it'd be more of a concern about hygiene, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that rat, literally, climbs onto its cot, it's going for the baby. That's its goal.
Yeah.
Which I could see a rat coming across the baby sort of scaring it and making it bite it, maybe. But I can't see one going for it. I don't know much about rats, but that just doesn't seem right. It just seems really bizarre. But you're right, though. What is the answer? The only other answer is the rat gets into the house, knocks over a lamp or something, because they've established that the obviously with it being the 1900s, a lot of the lamps are like gas lamps, with actual like flame, and maybe starts a fire and Tramp saves the baby from the fire.
Yes, but then why do they go? You'd have to set up the rat is clumsy, and that's the risk. Well, ideally you would. I mean, like I said, this film doesn't do that. That's the first time, at least in my memory, I watched it 2 days ago, but that's the first time we see that fucking rat. Like,
no, he's in the opening of the movie.
Right, okay, but he's not like
Lady chases. He's set up in the first sort of 10 minutes, and then he doesn't show up again until the last 10 minutes.
But he's not set up as baby destroyer rat, is he?
No. He doesn't come in like, "Hi, I'm Ratty McRatface, and I eat babies. You got a baby here?" And Lady's like, "No," and he's like, "Oh, I guess I'll try another house, but if you ever get a baby, I'm coming back. I promise you." She's like, "Don't do that." He's like, "No, I might."
Whereas the cats, like, I mean, maybe you do it like, if there's a point where Lady says to Tramp, where Tramp's like, "Oh, stay out here, explore the world with me." It's so funny because essentially there's elements of all 4 Toy Story movies in this one film.
Yes, there is.
Which is so interesting from a story point of view, because now it would be a franchise. Now this would be sequelized, and the ultimate aim of the film would be that at some point Lady and the Tramp do some exploring. But anyway, Toy Story's genius. So if maybe you go, because the cats destroy the room. So when Lady says to Tramp, "Who's going to protect the baby?" in your mind, you go, "Yeah, that's right. The cats are after the baby's milk." If you change that dialogue to, "What, I need to protect the baby. Look at what you didn't see the destruction the cats could cause." You'd kind of get, well, that's why. But then you can't do the whole, because they catch the rat, and then that's what Jim Deere realizes. That's how Jim Deere realizes.
If you do,
it's weird, but it is embedded well.
Yeah, if you do the version that you're referring to, where the cats sort of remain the villain, in that they're after the baby's milk, so the Siamese cats do something that accidentally harm the baby, and Tramp is blamed. It's really hard to undo that. How do you prove it was the Siamese cats?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, it does need to be a rat. But that again, then the Siamese cats are just there for a song that has not aged well. Like, it was so funny because up until that point, and that song, like, it's quite a way into the film before that appears.
Yes.
And I'd literally turned to Jess about 5 minutes before that and been like, "I haven't seen anything like racially insensitive yet. Have you?" And she was like, "Not really." And then that song started, and I turned to her and was like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah,
like, here
right,
it is. And then from then on,
because I'd mentioned at the end of the previous podcast,
yeah,
right. Yeah.
And from then on in, it's just stereotypes galore, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
It is appalling. It is awful.
It's pretty bad. And what's really frustrating as well is it's a weirdly catchy song.
Right, yeah.
Like, musically, it's a very catchy tune. It's like the melody and the thing of it. It's just a shame that the content is horrendous.
Yeah. And it really is.
So I mean, that's a big problem. With racism and cultural insensitivity aside, because otherwise we're just not going to talk about anything else all podcast. Better than what I was going to do to move us on. I was going to go, so, in conclusion, racism, wrong. Let's talk about another element. Yeah, I mean, also true, and racism bad. Now, what else is in this movie? Just because otherwise, I just don't want it to override this discussion as it has done so far.
Yeah,
I definitely think it needed addressing. I think we'd have been remiss to ignore it, but I also don't think it should overpower the review, because there is more to this film than that, basically.
Yeah. I've got a specific thing I'm itching to talk about. Can I go, or did you?
No, go. Absolutely.
So one of the most fascinating decisions in this film from a script point of view, from a story point of view, is the introduction of Aunt Sarah. Because in a modern day version of this, Toy Story, Andy, in Toy Story 1, Andy is not, spoilers for Toy Story franchise, Andy doesn't give Woody the attention. in Toy Story 3, Bonnie doesn't give Woody the attention. Like, the modern day heart-wrenching version of this is Jim, Dear and Darling really do truly start to ignore Lady. Like, you don't get that moment where Jim Dear lifts her up and, like, she looks at the baby and all of that stuff. Like, the parents reject her. So what I found fascinating was when you introduce Aunt Sarah, I was like, oh, this is like the older way of doing it, because this means you can still have your happy ending. But what I loved about it was, one, it doesn't add more tragedy. Like, it's way more tragic, and you'd feel more for Lady if it was Jim, Dear and Darling. But it's a different kind of tragedy, because the tragedy is, you're like, fucking hell, all this is happening to her, and her actual parents, her actual guardians, her owners, is probably the right term, her owners would hate this. Like, that adds to the tragedy of the circumstance. When she gets the muzzle, when she goes to the pound, you're just like, no! Like, I mean, admittedly, she goes to the pound and then gets released, so Aunt Sarah must have let her out, because the owners aren't back yet. But anyway, that's another one of those kind of like, oh, that's weird to think about plot bits. But I was like, it adds so much more kind of weight to the drama. At least it adds weight to the drama of the plot, not the drama of the emotion. But it also allows the ending to be more heartwarming, because you believe they're a family unit, you believe that they're all together, because you know that's what Jim, Dear and Darling would have done. You believe, you know, there's real... When Jim Dear is like, no, she's trying to tell us something, you're like, fuck yeah, Jim! Like, yes. And that's harder to get to if they're the ones that, you know, let her down. But I just thought that was fascinating, because I really believe the modern approach, and obviously I've not seen the remake, and I don't think the remake does this, because, you know, in my experience, most of the Disney reimagined classics are literally beat for beat, except I know they've taken out the cats.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't know that for sure, but I would put a lot of money on those cats not appearing.
Yeah. No, that song they've I know they've addressed that. So
right.
I thought that was just like, from out of all these we'd done, I said before we had all of these that done, there were just story decisions that I found fascinating, because, like, on the one hand, that feels incredibly old-fashioned, because literally in a Pixar movie, you go for the gut a bit more and you make it the parents. But on the other hand, I think that was also a clever decision that you find in modern storytelling, the complexity of, well, let's make it Aunt Sarah for these beats and these reasons, is like a really considered approach, you know? A lot of movies from that time, not to discredit them in any way, but a lot of them go A to B to C. The Italian Job, there wasn't a lot of embedding and complexity to that story, apart from, like, logistics of the heist, maybe. But the fundamentals of the story, it wasn't, you know, we were talking about, well, if the Mafia were in place here, why on earth weren't the Mafia there at the end? Like, it felt like stuff was missing. I think most movies from the time feel a bit like that, whereas this felt like, well, if we make this Aunt Sarah, then we can do this. And if we embed the dog's got no smell, when suddenly they've got smell, it will feel like triumph. And all of these things were just, I felt, very considered. And the Aunt Sarah one in particular, I changed my mind about like 50 times whilst watching it, because I was like, oh, that doesn't feel very modern. Oh, but it has led to this, which is quite good. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on Aunt Sarah and her function as a in the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, what she services is exactly what you've correctly identified. Is that they basically, when they were looking at this story, they wanted the happy ending, and the way they got to that happy ending wasn't the way a modern story would do it, which is cleaner, maybe less believable. In that, what they would do is they would. Because in the Toy Story movies, even though sometimes, like, so let's look at Toy Story 4, because it's the one I've seen the most recently. Me and Andy rewatched that a couple of weeks ago. Bonnie...
It's also, I think, one of the most comparable movies to this film, because fundamentally you've got one character saying, explore the world and be free, and another character going, no, my role is X.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
It's a very comparable movie, I think.
Mm-hmm. So with Bonnie, what they did, which I think was clever, was that she's sort of not playing with Woody, and it's an emotional gut punch for him because Bonnie was his happily ever after, supposedly. So now he doesn't have that. So it's like, but at the same time, the movie never at any point, what they do is they just very cleverly balance a malicious version of Bonnie that's intentionally, leaving Woody, which is maybe like how they could have played it in a movie where Bonnie was more of an antagonist than more of a Sid than an Andy. But instead, they managed to just tote this line between Bonnie being sweet and you understand her motives for not playing with Woody, and Woody does too, because at no point does he see her as an antagonist, right? So that's how they choose to balance it. They make Molly. They make her motives like I said Molly instead of Bonnie then because of Andy's sister. They make Bonnie's motives very clear and understandable for a child. A child is just interested in whatever toys, and at no point do any of the toys sort of make aspersions about her character. Whereas in Toy Story 2, when Jessie told the story of being abandoned, it was very much this perspective of this little girl loved me and then she threw me away, and it's deeply sad, and that little girl is kind of at fault in a weird way. They kind of play it a little bit more like that. But the way they got away with it in Toy Story 4 was very much towing that line of at no point do the toys sort of suggest Bonnie's at fault. It's just kind of life, right? Like things that are out of their control, which allows them to then have have whatever ending they want at the end, because it doesn't really matter, because at no point was Bonnie ever an antagonist. The way they do it in this movie is to just very clever. I mean, it is kind of clever. It's less clean because there's a lot of like, wait a minute, you've just had a baby and now you have to go away?
Yeah, that's bizarre. That's so weird.
Because you can't claim it's for work, because, I mean, even the 1900s, they must have had some form of maternity. Like, I guess. Actually, I should Google that. Maybe they didn't. It's very possible. 1900s, who knows, right?
Well, I think the impression is she's a stay-at-home. She doesn't... I didn't get the impression she worked particularly.
That's right, because there's the scene where she's at home knitting. This is before the baby. And then Jim Deere's coming home from work. Right, yeah. So whatever this trip is, they can't not take because they've had a baby. I baffled. I mean, look, it exists. It's a story point. It exists to get them out of the way for the story, which fine. Like it just, but it is very. This is what I mean about it being messy.
Yeah.
Like what you gain in the ability to make the ending feel right, because the risk you take if you go down the route of playing them as being mean to Lady or dismissive of Lady is that the happy ending would feel slightly, as you pointed out. So yeah, I 100% agree, because ultimately, like you've got two solutions, which is not making them the villains at all ever at any point in the movie, and then you've got less conflict, or you bring in an Aunt Sarah, and while bringing in Aunt Sarah is way less clean from a storytelling perspective, because you've got to jump all through these hoops of they're leaving, this lady's in charge, she's not as fond of Lady, she thinks Lady's gonna bite the dog or bite the baby, or like give the baby fleas or whatever, so she's gonna go take the dog and put it in a muzzle and stick it in a doghouse and all this stuff. You've got to jump through all these extra hoops. The movie has to wiggle its story in all these weird directions that are a bit unnatural for it, just to make it work. But I think from a story perspective, you're right. It really does allow the ending to be so much happier than I think it would have been otherwise. So yeah, I 100% agree with your assertion, which is annoying because I just spent 10 minutes repeating essentially what you said.
I didn't feel that way. I think another interesting one is they spend so much time at the beginning, and I feel the pace does suffer for that at the beginning. They spend so much time establishing this life of luxury that Lady is getting, be that, watch the discussions with the neighbouring dogs, in particular, her sleeping in the bed, not sleeping in the ground. And like, I'm watching this thinking, well, they're doing this so that she's truly the fish out of water when she's running around the town with Tramp. And again, I found it interesting that they, again, in a modern context, that Tramp and Lady story is literally, oh, you're not from the wrong side of the tracks. You don't know how to handle yourself in the streets, but don't worry, I can show you. And it's not really that. There's not conflict. It's not like the modern version, those two, Lady and the Tramp, hate each other and gradually fall in love. Like, whereas Tramp just wants to help her. Like, and there's the scene where she's getting chased and all of that kind of stuff. But that becomes about, it becomes about Tramp saying, this is a better life. Absolutely. But it never becomes, you're wrong. It never becomes, you can't handle yourself. It never belittles Lady for the luxury that she happens to be given. Tramp doesn't, he tries to encourage her to do that life, but he doesn't resent the life she's been given. He loves her for her. Like, yeah. And I just think, again, that an incredibly both a 1950s concept, but also elements of deeper thought and a modern context. And I thought that was really interesting.
I also picked up on a small subtext that Tramp had maybe had a family that had either mistreated him or thrown him out. Like, maybe even the baby thing had happened. But he doesn't go down that route. He doesn't say oh, this happened to me. Like, it's kind of hinted at because he knows immediately they're having a baby and what the consequences of that would be, which feels like he's lived through it, and that was his experience maybe. But yeah, you're right. What's really clever is I particularly think to the scene. There's a scene after they've spent this sort of evening together having fun running around, and they get to the top of this hill and they're looking over, and she wants to go home. And he takes one last attempt to try and convince her that this is the life. And she's like, I still want to go home. And he's like, well, I tried, right? Like, I gave it a go. He doesn't continue to push. He immediately goes, okay, I gave it a shot. No change in your mind, huh? And then he takes her home. Or he tries to.
Yeah, she says.
That's interrupted for different reasons. But yeah, he's characterized very well in this. He's weirdly understanding.
And she's literally like, who would look after the baby? And he's like, yeah, fair enough. Like, it's really, which again, the cleverness of that is if you have him going, no, that's not good enough. If you have him resent her, and he does, they go on sidetracks partly because of his determination too. But if you overplay that too much, then he doesn't deserve his ending. He doesn't deserve the happy ending he gets because you really struggle to believe, more so than you already do, which is kind of a fair bit. You struggle to believe that he wants that, that he wants that ending, because the ending, I turned to Jess and I was like, where's the moment? They went through some trauma, they saw some shit, and he did ultimately get captured. So you could make the leap that he went, you know what? I've got the chance to live with Lady, and I've got the chance to have a family that is safer. My luck's going to run out. I'm going to accept this and I'm going to become a part of this family and accept the collar. He doesn't actually state that. We don't see that. Like, that is one example of something I think would happen in a modern script that is missing and you kind of feel is missing. It's a bit of a leap with what the movie gives us that Tramp's just settles into that life. Yeah, I think it's hard because at the end of the day, for me, it's Lady's movie. It's all about her. And when you were talking earlier about how they take quite a bit of time at the beginning setting it up, for me, I think I wouldn't have changed any. I wouldn't change any of the opening scenes at all. I think their pacing, while admittedly long in the grand scheme of when you pull out and look at the whole movie, they're really important. And the time they spend to establish her life as it is really, really valuable. And they do a lot with it. And I think it is a big part of why you then care about all the subsequent events. So I don't think, even given the opportunity, I would tighten up those first 10, 20 minutes. No, I don't know. I agree. Yeah, I just think a modern movie would. I'm not saying it should, though.
Yeah, no, a modern movie absolutely would. So there's two reasons for that, though, isn't there? There's a modern movie would just because modern movies are a bit more get to the point, just in general, because they're worried about losing the audience, aren't they? Which is weird, because let's be honest with you. Movie studios, I just want to point something out here. Once someone's got a ticket and sat down, you've got their money. You don't need to hit the action beats in the first 10 seconds because You gotta. They're sat down. They've bought popcorn. They're watching. You won.
Yeah. Chill out.
Yeah. Calm down. But you're right. But that's one element of it. But element two of it, I think, is in a modern context as well. You've got to remember that now the history of movies have created shorthands. Yeah. So in a modern movie, you wouldn't actually do that much to set up Lady's situation, or even Tramp's, as you pointed out. But I don't think it's necessarily just because studios are like, get to the point, or audiences are like, get to the point. It's that now we get it. It's it's like we talked about earlier with the cultural stuff. The stereotypes are sometimes a quick way to a thing, right? You want to set up what this character is like in this movie. Oh, well, we'll make him Irish, so he's like this. And then the audience will understand immediately who he is and what he's like. We don't have to take too much time to spend it. In a modern day, they'd go, right, well, she's from privileged background, he's from a less privileged background. Take 2 seconds to set that up, and off we go on our adventure. Because we don't need that setup anymore, because we get it instantly, because it's a story we've seen 1,000 times now, right? So there's a certain element of cinema has created its own shorthand, which is allowing movies to get to the point quicker in a way that doesn't feel rushed, because you get it straight away. But it is a nice breath of fresh air to watch these older ones and go, oh, isn't it nice just to explore the world a bit? Like, watch her chase a rat, or that beautiful moment where she digs up a bone, but she accidentally digs up a flower. So she tries to push the flower back, but she does it upside down. It's just take the time to have moments like that. That's glorious. Come on, like.
Well, it also helps set up the threat. Like the pound, like even before we got to the pound. The idea that dogs could be collected and chucked in the pound, that to me felt like a very real threat, because we'd seen it. We'd seen footage of it. And yeah, I completely agree. And also, like, not just, I think I apologise because this is me essentially taking the opportunity to rant about something, but it's also like genre has shorthands, like that kind of stereotypes. That is more acceptable in comedy than it is in any other place. And it blows my mind. This really is just me ranting. I'm so sorry. So 2002, 2003, maybe 2004. I would be consistently angry later than that, 2006, 2007, in our sociology lessons, because I would make the point on repeated occasions that a lot of Little Britain, which is a sketch show in the UK's content, was flat out racism. Like, it shouldn't be allowed. And the argument was always, they're playing on stereotypes. And I'm like, they're not. Like, I'm sorry, like, a lot of this content is obscene, and I don't know how they're getting away with it. What's mental is the worst offence for that, which essentially is an ongoing sketch where someone is eating cake, and when they find out that cake has been made by someone that's a different race to them, they throw up. That sketch was repeated. Recently there was a charity thing in the UK where it was a night where entertainers were providing content from home. It included a bunch of Little Britain sketches, including another one of that one where the same thing happened. And I was livid. I was like, how the fuck are they getting away with this still? Even 10 years later, how is that being allowed? How is that on television?
Those two guys seem to have been getting away with also. So they did another show, didn't they? What was it? Come Fly With Me, was it called? Where
but they blacked up in like two. Yeah. When did Come Fly With Me air? Like,
I don't know, but far more recently, and it just still breaks my brain they're allowed to do it. I don't know why they get the leeway they get.
2010, and they literally were in makeup to make themselves look a different colour. It was. I don't know if I apologise. I don't know. Blacked up might be not the politically correct way of...
What, politically correct way of describing the racist act? I don't give a shit if I'm being politically correct to people who are fucking doing something so appalling. I'm not giving them that, like, that's horrible. Like, yeah.
It's horrific. And
how they get away with that, I don't know.
And it's crazy to me that, like... Because comedy shouldn't get away with it. Because... in a drama, you do that to emphasise the dramatic implications and why it's wrong. You don't get that nuance in a comedy sometimes. Some you do, obviously. But and so, yeah, I think I just wanted to rant about Little Britain, and I apologise. but The pounds.
You were talking about genre as shorthand, because I was saying.
Yeah, so I think that's another reason why you get that. But like we said at the beginning, that is another reason why I'd recommend this film, just because certain aspects of it are fascinating. Like,
yeah. So I think so. Yeah. So that opening, I think, wouldn't happen in a modern version of the movie, but not for the reasons that you think. I think because now the writer would not need to spend as much time setting up the world. It's like we talked about with Bill and Ted. There was a lot of time spent explaining very simple time travel mechanics you wouldn't need to these days, because a modern audience is far more familiar with time travel premises from the hundreds of time travel movies that happen to have existed in culture. There's just a certain sort of, even if you've not seen the movies it's relating to, there's a certain sort of cultural osmosis, right? Like, do you remember that point, and it's finally starting to end, where every movie explained to you what an EMP was?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that going through that? It was like a 10-year period where any movie that used an EMP, it would always be this. We're going to use an EMP. What's that? An electromagnetic pulse. It'll make all the electronics go haywire, including my phone. Yeah, including your phone. That conversation, that back and forth existed in every movie for about 10 years until filmmakers were finally went, and this is only recent, I'm talking like the last 2 or 3 years, filmmakers finally went, I think they've got it. I think we're safe. I think we can just call it an EMP now.
And that shorthand is, again, why the stereotypes exist. Because in a world where we've had Inside Out, where we've literally had feelings and emotions personified as characters, we don't need dogs to be stereotyped to warm and relate to the dogs. Because we're used to all sorts of shit talking, you know. So
back then, I think that I'm, and again, we're not excusing them. We're just trying to maybe put some context and some explanation to, because I honestly think the stereotyping that occurs in this movie, for the most part, is quite innocent. The stereotyping that's problematic is the cats, because that is outright calling out East Asian people as being sort of self-serving, sneaky, evil, whatever like stereotype you want to throw at them. And that was a real problem in America, particularly and ironically, sort of mid 1800s to late 1900s, which is when this movie, to early 1900s, which is when this movie was set. You know, there was an anti-China sentiment in America that culturally existed, and this movie sort of has accidentally hit on that, you know, and let's be honest, not a surprising situation. Like when was Pearl Harbor? Like in relation to this, like what, 5-10 years before? Like didn't Pearl Harbor probably happened while this was in development? Like it doesn't, because I think the original idea for this came to Walt Disney in 1938, and it didn't get made obviously till 1955, but it was being worked on and off between that time period, and I'm pretty sure Pearl Harbor was 1940s, right? So like, Oh, we've come back to the stereotyping thing. I shouldn't have. My point is, a lot of the stereotyping in this movie is just them being like a quick way to give you an idea of what this character is, and it's not malicious in intent. Unfortunately, one of them is, and it's why it's highlighted. If you look up this movie and then put the word racism on Google, it will talk about this scene and not the other stereotyping, and I think that's why, to be honest with you. That one does genuinely feel quite malicious. And like they're making a statement about people from East Asia particularly, which is really inappropriate. But anyway,
my last sort of comment is just the voice acting is phenomenal. All the voice acting in this film, I think the actors do a brilliant job. I think Tramp in particular is brilliant.
How is that man so charming? He worked on almost nothing else. How is that man so charming?
I know, it's so, because I did that. I looked him up and was like, this guy must be like a hero. This dude must be a legend. And I'm like, oh, he's mainly famous for this. It's like, who knew? I'm not saying he's not a legend, but like, it's crazy.
He does an amazing job, and he did basically nothing else.
Crazy. Larry Roberts.
Yeah, and he's stunningly good in this. His voice really does make Tramp likable very quickly. He brings a certain charm. You buy Tramp as a character, because the premise of Tramp's character is, you know, he's this lovable rascal. He's a womanizer, which is weird for a kids' movie that they do. They do a whole song about how he's a womanizer, which is super like, is this for kids still?
Yeah.
There's a whole section of the movie where Lady's mad at him because she's like, "Oh, who's Trixie and who's this?" And I'm like, "What movie am I watching now?" This no longer feels like Lady and the Tramp anymore. Also,
I think that's weird.
Isn't her
at
getting...
one point he's like, "Come along, bitch."
Does he actually? Did I miss that? Holy hell!
Yeah, as they're about to enter the zoo.
Wait, no, doesn't he say
something...
Pidge? He calls her Pidge.
Oh, maybe it's Tidge. Maybe Jess and I both misheard it then. Hold on. Let me see if that.
But like, here's the thing: is that is such an unnecessary plot point because she's got every right to be mad at him. He led her astray, and he got her in the pound. Right? They don't need to add this subplot that he's been sleeping around. It's really unnecessary. I mean, it does lead to a really great song. I'm not gonna lie. Like the songs in this are all very good. Like in terms of the their composition, they're all very catchy. Jerry, He's a Tramp is a good song, and it's very well sung. But like, what is that plot there for? It's so unnecessary.
Oh, apparently there's debate whether it's like. There is debate amongst people. There's a particular one where the debate is it Pidge or is it bitch? A lot of people think it sounds like bitch.
I'm sure it's Pidge. He calls a Pidge all movie.
Yeah, it's got to be. Yeah, it's got to be.
It seems unlikely to be anything else. But okay, so it turns out you're not the only one who misheard that clearly.
No, not according to my quick Google
so
and
a
Twitter.
few little things I just wanted to point out before we get into the triv. Where are they? What is this place? So we see it from like a wide shot twice in the movie, and it's this like quite rustic village, right? There's fields, there's trees, there's houses, but they're not built up, right? It's not a built up area. But then when he and Lady go out on the town or whatever, it's a city with big tall buildings that definitely don't exist in the wide shots. And, like, there's this implication that she sort of lives on the other side of the tracks. But I'm, like, looking at that opening shot going, where's the tracks here that separate this idyllic little village from the city they visit later? Like, I'm so confused.
Yeah, that is weird.
And it's 2 moments they look down on this little village, from a high up point. The positioning of this movie throws me. Whatever. It's one of those things. I just got to sort of accept it. Visually, how much did you love the way they framed everything from really down low? Dog's perspective.
Beautiful.
Jim Deere and Darling's faces appear so infrequently in this movie. You get glimpses of them because the movie is from the dog's perspective. They're in the shot. You're seeing Lady, so you're seeing from their feet to their sort of, I don't know, upper thigh maybe, but like nothing more. And it's very rare you do it. It's so cleverly done.
Do you think that was a stylistic choice, or do you think people were harder to animate back then?
No, it's stylistic. They actually, not to skip to the trivia, but they made a little model of the house, like a large. I say little. It was from what I understand, it's a very large model of the house, so they could work out framings, and they would take pictures from inside of the house with a camera. And they made sure the camera, whenever they took pictures from inside the model, were low down, really low down, to create that. So when they did all the background paintings, it was always like that.
Wow, amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, stunning. I mean, and it certainly, look, and let's be honest, it definitely saved them some money because you don't have to animate mouths moving on the people when they're talking. But I think it was stylistic first. The whole thing is shot from the dog's perspective, and I think that's beautiful. It's really clever.
It's very clever.
I
just realised. Sorry, I'll wait until you do your other. Well, why?
No, go on. We'll get one of yours. What do we want to think?
Just realised we spent. Well, no, I've just realised I spent my entire fucking introduction talking about that scene, and we haven't talked about it. The spaghetti scene holds up. Still a lovely scene. Still feels very romantic, very sweet. I think that scene still works. Huh?
It's funnier than I remember it being.
You know what? I don't remember them actually kissing. I thought they just sort of... They got to nearly kiss and got embarrassed and kind of pulled away. When it was like a full-on smacker, I was like, oh.
Yeah. I just liked the two chefs yelling at each other. He's like,
Yeah,
I'm,
that was
you know, and he's like, I'm saying get him the good food or whatever. And the other chef's going, okay, I'm making him the good food. You know, it's like, obviously it's all horrendous stereotyping, but I just love the idea that this guy is like really going to sort him out. He's going to get him on a proper date, and the other guy is going to bloody fall in line, or he's going to get his backhand.
I tell you though, it's way more pasta than meatballs, isn't it? No wonder Tramp has to like be like, here you go, take the last meatball, because they're not.
Well,
good sized portion, but.
Well, there's a bit of trivia to do with that. I don't know if I'll be able to find it quickly, but there wouldn't have been meatballs in the pasta in 1902 or whenever the film was set.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, I think it's to do with the access to meat at that time. The common version of that dish would have just been the pasta with the sauce. Meatballs weren't commonly put in. It'll come up in the trivia, and I'll give you the exact details in a sec. I'm trying to find it, but wait. Let me see if I can.
That's all right. We'll do it in a sec.
Wait, no, I think I found it. No, I haven't. There it is. Here we go. Despite the association with Italian food and restaurants, meatballs did not exist in Italy at the time the movie takes place. Beef at the time was expensive and hard to get for poor Italians. It was not until Italian immigrants came to America, where meat was cheaper and more available, that meatballs were added to spaghetti and sauce. This means that Tony and Joe are potentially among the first restaurateurs in America to use this recipe.
Amazing.
So there you go.
Did you have any other comments before?
Yeah, there's a couple. Just on that scene as well, I will say it is sweeter than I remember, but it's also funnier than I remember, and I think it's really nice that they managed to balance the two. I at that point, it's so early in their sort of relationship. I didn't want it to be too soppy. Like I was like, I don't want them to have a nice time, but let's not get, like, you know what I mean? They know each other about a day. Let's not go too far here. So I thought it was very sweet that they sort of like balanced the sweet plot between these two dogs who are becoming very fond of each other with this very comical, like these two humans who are just trying to put these dogs on a date, which is ridiculous. It's the movie does. My memory of it is that the movie just ignored how ridiculous it was that these two grown adults were feeding the dogs at a table, you know, with human food and all that stuff. But the movie totally is winking at you the whole scene.
Oh, it goes in on it, yeah.
Yeah, the movie knows it's insane and that these two guys are actually kind of like slightly bonkers. And because of that, it makes the scene so much more enjoyable. So yeah, I thought it was
Yeah,
really
I think
good.
the exact moment they go so far over the line, it's fine, is the minute that he gives the dog a menu.
Yeah. It's so good. I love it. It's like they totally knew what they were doing. It's really good. Yeah. So let's have a look. Oh yeah. Can we Disney just foreshadowing? It's a bit much. There's a bit right when Lady's at her happiest, and she sits down between Jim Deere and Darling, and they're at the fireplace, and it's the evening, and she's looking content. And Darling says, "I don't think anything could take her place in our hearts." I literally wrote in my notes, "I don't think anything could take place in our hearts," she said foreshadowingly. It's so like, I hope nothing comes along to replace her. It's so bad.
It zooms out a little bit more, and Jim's like pricking condoms, just like, nope, nothing at all. I don't know if they had. I don't know what the contraception was at the time period, but
yeah, in what 1902 or whatever this was set. Yeah, I did write down a few different things that people said. I wrote down footloose and collar free. I enjoyed that.
That's funny.
I also wrote down I'll break your face, which is what one of the Italian guys says to the other.
I loved speaking of the pound. I loved the notion because you do just the slight spoof of The Great Escape.
Yes,
and the fact that they're singing that song to cover the noise of the tunnel being dug, I thought was fucking brilliant.
Yeah,
that and the beaver really made me laugh.
Yeah, the beaver was very funny. That whole scene where they sell the beaver the thing as a log moving device. Really charming scene, just very funny, very well written. Yeah. The beaver is a bit of a caricature, but like he's very funny, and he's not a caricature of a particular, you know, a person from a particular ethnicity. So it's fine. It's way more acceptable.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there you go. I think that's everything. Cool. I think that's everything. So there you go.
Cool,
should we get to the triv?
Yeah, give me some triv.
Give me some triv. So in 1937, Walt Disney storyboard artist Joe Grant came up with the idea inspired by the antics of his own English Springer Spaniel called Lady. How she was shoved aside by his new baby. He actually approached Walt Disney with sketches of Lady, and Disney enjoyed the sketches and commissioned Grant to start working on story development for a new animated feature titled Lady. Now, through the late 1930s and the early 1940s, Joe, another artist, worked on the story and developed a bunch of different versions of it, and they took a bunch of different approaches. They had like 3 or 4 different sort of interpretations of how that story might play out. Disney didn't like any of them. He didn't like any of them. He primarily thought Lady was too nice and sweet, and he didn't think there was enough action. So, it kind of faded away. But at some point, he read a short story by a guy called Ward Green, titled Happy Dan, the Cynical Dog. He actually read it. It was a short story published in Cosmopolitan magazine in about 1945. And he thought that Grant's old Lady story would be vastly improved if Lady fell in love with a cynical dog character like the one in Green's story. So he bought the rights to Green's story. The problem was, Grant had left the studio at this point, the guy who came up with Lady. So they just started working on it without him. And by 1953, they had a pretty good story to put together based on Grant's old storyboards and Green's short story. But Grant did not receive a credit in the film, any money, or anything. And it wasn't something. And the credit element was not rectified until the Platinum Edition behind the scenes vignette that explained his role that came out in like 2007 or something.
Shit.
So the guy who literally came up with the story and design for Lady and the premise that she'd be pushed out by a baby, which is the backbone of the movie, not credited, not paid.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And what's even funnier about that, you might enjoy this. So the guy who wrote the short story, you know, the whatever that story I just read about was, I forgot what it was called now. Happy Dan, the Cynical Dog. The guy who wrote that, Ward Green, he was then hired by Disney to write a novelization of the film. A novelization Disney insisted was released 2 years before the film, so that audiences would have some time to familiarize themselves with the plot.
That's crazy.
So Disney was like, this is a brand new story, because obviously that doesn't make sense until you go, wait a minute, actually, all of his previous movies, maybe with the exception of Dumbo, were not original-ish. They were sort of based on, you know, it's like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella. These are all classic tales he's retelling, right? So this is one of their handful of very few stories that hadn't previously existed. So it's almost like a studio these days making a superhero movie that's, you know, a bit different and going, oh God, how are we going to sell this to the audience? He was like, I've got to convince people this story is a classic. So he made sure the book was out 2 years ahead of the film.
That's crazy.
Yeah, bonkers. So, singer Peggy Lee not only voiced 4 different characters in this film, she wrote 6 of the songs. But she then later went on to sue
Isn't
Disney.
that all the songs? How many songs are there?
I think it's all but the Siamese song, I think.
Right.
I think. I'd have to double check. There was another writer on it whose name comes up later on, but who did, I think, worked with her on some of those ones and then wrote the Siamese song, I think. But I'll come back. That may come back up later, depending on if I deleted the trivia or not. I'd really tried to cull the trivia this week, and it was difficult because this is an old movie, so there's lots of it. Peggy Lee then later sued Disney, though, for breach of contract because she did all that work for them, voiced 4 characters, wrote 6 songs, and she still retained the rights to certain transcripts and stuff, and they hadn't paid her since it came out in the theatres. And she claimed when it came out on VHS in the late 80s that she should have some money for that, because obviously when the movie was made, home release wasn't a thing. But she claimed when they brought it out in the 80s that she should be given some money. Disney tried to fight it, but
this is this is at the core, different mediums, but this is at the core of the writers' strike, isn't it?
But way ahead of it.
Fighting for
but way ahead of it. Absolutely right. Disney and her, they went over it. Apparently, the legal battle went on for years. They finally settled in 1991, and she was awarded $2.3 million.
Wow.
So 1991 they dealt with that, and that movie came out on VHS, I think in like 87, 88. So that went on for a couple of years before they finally paid out.
So what's the... Hold on, what was that?
2.3 million.
$1 million in what year? 1991.
1991, yeah. Are you doing the conversion? I'll be interested to see what that figure is. While you're doing the math, I'll quickly tell you that Disney apparently didn't originally want to include the Bella Notte spaghetti eating scene. No explanation as to why not, but apparently he didn't. He didn't like it. Weird. Literally the most iconic scene in the movie, but there you go. Just proof that Disney wasn't always on the money with these things.
Yeah. It looks like I found that the US dollar experienced an average inflation rate of 2.2% per year during this period. In other words, $1 million in 1991 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $1.8 million in 2020. So yeah, kind of roughly double it. So it's about, $4 million in today's money.
Right.
But considering the lengths, like as we mentioned, the lengths writers have had to go to since to get, and I know it's a different thing, but like to get, some DVD money, to get some streaming money, all of that stuff, that is a big win.
I agree. It's crazy. I mean, I've just had a look myself. Yeah, it'd be. I've just worked it out at 5 million-ish, 4.9 million.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got the same figure. Crazy, absolutely crazy. The film's opening sequence, in which Darling unwraps a hat box on Christmas morning and finds Lady inside, is apparently based on an actual incident in Walt Disney's life. After he'd forgotten a dinner date with his wife, he then offered her a puppy and a hat box as a surprise, and was immediately forgiven. So there you go.
Oh, when it started, were you like, is this a Christmas movie? Like.
No, I remembered enough to know that was just where it started, that she was a Christmassy gift. But that music, that opening sequence when the credits are rolling on the music, that's beautiful music. It's so good.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
That film, the music is incredible. A dream sequence where giant dogs take their owners for walks was actually in the movie, but scrapped because of adverse test audience reactions.
Fair enough.
I mean, that sounds monstrous. So, the beaver character was effectively recycled as a gopher in Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree in 1966, about 11 years later, right down to his whistling speech impediment. I've seen two versions of trivia, one where it used the word impediment and one where it used the word pattern, so someone a bit more sensitive wrote it the second time. I tried to merge both and ended up with the wrong one. The voice was originally created by Stan Freberg, who had a background in comedic voices. The demands of voicing the character proved too much, however, so Freberg eventually resorted to using a real whistle to capture the whistling effect. Like, he put a whistle in his mouth to create it, because he couldn't do it naturally. So there you go. Let's see what else we got. At the time of release, this was the highest grossing Disney cartoon since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is 1937 release. Oh, God. All right, this is we're going to get to a small section called The Fucking Aspect Ratio. So, originally Lady and the Tramp was planned to be a film with a regular full-frame aspect ratio. However, growing interest in widescreen films among moviegoers had led Disney himself to decide that they should animate the film in CinemaScope, making Lady and the Tramp the first animated feature filmed in this process, and the widest film the company had ever created. The problem was the film was already in production, so they had to change a bunch of stuff to make that happen.
Right.
Yeah, so first once they made that decision mid-production, they had to extend many of the background paintings to fit the new format. So they added overlays to add the extra, few inches either side of the screen. And then they had to add stuff to make those two paintings seamlessly link together. It was a whole nightmare. It also made it difficult for any sort of it made it really difficult for them to do a shot where a single character dominated the screen, which is what they'd designed it. So groups had to be sort of spread out to keep the screen from appearing sort of sparse. Longer takes became necessary, since constant jump cutting would seem busy or annoying with this new format. Layout artists had to reinvent their entire layout technique, and animators had to remember that they had to move their characters across the background instead of the background passing behind them, which had been the previous standard. Those are all of the effect. So all of that trouble, right, to get it in CinemaScope, the wide format, because Disney wanted it, because that was the popular thing, right? Mm. So those problems were great, because not great. They weren't great. Those problems were there, and situation got a little bit worse when the premiere got closer, and it turned out that most theatres did not have the capability to show films in CinemaScope. So, upon learning this, Walt issued 2 versions of the film, one in widescreen and another in the Academy ratio. This involved gathering the layout artists to restructure the key scenes where characters were on the edges of the screen. So they had to essentially rearrange where characters were in the frame during several key scenes for the release.
Oh.
So Disney's a lunatic, is what I've learned.
That's madness. Yeah, that's utter madness.
Yeah, everything about that is insane. All right, so now some more quick fiery ones. There's still a couple left, but I say a couple. There's a fair few left, but these are quicker ones, so they don't involve as much explaining. As I've already mentioned, there was a model of the inside of Jim Deere and Darling's house that was built for a guide for staging. Background artists shot photos from a deliberately low angle to simulate the dog's eye view of the world. Before animating
brilliant.
Yeah, it's genius. It totally works. Before animating the fight between Tramp and Rat, the animator Wolfgang Reitherman kept rats in a cage next to his desk to study their behaviour. That was interesting. Weird one in terms of like people being related to each other. So Werner Felton, who voices Aunt Sarah, is the mother of Lee Miller, who provided the voice of Jim Deere. So Aunt Sarah is Jim Deere's father. In terms of the actors, and
Father
his
or
father,
mother, don't you mean?
Sorry,
father, don't you mean mother?
That was going to the next one. There's more links.
Oh right, okay, right.
So yeah, so Vera Felton, who voices Aunt Sarah, is the mother of actor Lee Miller, who provided the voice of Jim Deere. His father was also named Lee Miller, and was actually did a load of Disney voice work as well, including he was Pluto. In various shorts and a bunch of stuff. Sadly, he died in 1941. I thought he was also in this movie, but I must have misread that trivia. Otherwise, I'd have deleted it. The film's setting was partially inspired by Walt Disney's boyhood hometown of Marceline, Missouri, I guess except for the city parts. In early versions of the script, the rat was actually named Herman. Speaking of things renamed, Tramp was originally called Homer, then Rags, and then Bozo. Eventually, obviously they settled on the name Tramp, and a 1940 version of the script was the one that introduced the Siamese Cats. They were originally known as Nip and Tuck, but they eventually became known rather randomly, well not randomly, rather sort of like, did nobody have a good eye? Like, there's a character in Star Wars, Clone Wars, called Pre-Vizsla, and the pre-visual effects guys made him, and it's just like, come on, guys. They eventually became known as Si and Am.
Yeah,
and that is their final names.
We've talked about them. I think
I know, but I just like calling them Si and Am is just lazy writing. I'm not even talking about stereotyping now. That's just lazy.
Yeah, no, I agree. Lady and the Homer, or Lady and the Bozo, doesn't have the same ring to it.
It doesn't, does it? You're not wrong. So Lady's first appearance in the film was inspired by an event at in Walt Disney's personal life. Oh, wait. What? We've done this. This is in here twice somehow.
You've done that, haven't you?
Sorry. I don't know why that's in there twice. The song Held by the Dogs in the Pound is Home Sweet Home. And it's the only song in the film that was not written by Peggy Lee and Sonny Burke. Sonny Burke, obviously, being the other songwriter for the film that I mentioned earlier. Tramp's predicament in being thought to have been attacked a baby and then protecting it from a predator is apparently a reference to a folk tale of called Gellert, which I don't know and I'm not familiar with, but there you go. The song Jock sings while burying his bones is in the tune of Loch Lomond, which is a Scottish song from 1841. In the early productions of this movie, Boris was going to be the lead male dog of the movie. And after some time, it was decided the title Lady and Boris didn't sound catchy enough, so a new character who would soon become known as Tramp was created to fill this role. Boris was reduced to appearing in only one scene of the movie. So there you go. So some weird connections between this movie and some other Disney movies. Jock actually appears in 101 Dalmatians, and he helps.
Oh, that's quite cool.
And he helps saving the pups, sort of putting them in the same universe. And then in 1988, Oliver and Company, he appeared again, but with Trusty and Peg during the song "Why Should I Worry." So 101 Dalmatians, Lady and the Tramp, and Oliver and Company all happen to have occurred within the same dog universe. It turns out.
Nice.
The dog
That's
catcher
great.
is constantly whistling the melody of Where Has My Little Dog Gone? Which, perfect.
Right, yeah.
So, this one's one of my favourites just because it would have been a very different movie. In the climax of the picture, Trusty was originally killed when hit by the wagon. That is why they've got the shot of Jock nudging him and him not rousing. When Walt Disney viewed the scene, he was shocked. Not wanting a repeat of the traumatic scenes from Bambi 1942, he thought that the audience had thought that was too intense. He then made the animators put Trusty into the end Christmas scenes with a broken leg to reassure the audience that Trusty was simply knocked out in the previous scene.
Again, a very modern thing. In a modern movie, I'm pretty sure the dog would die, and I honestly thought the dog had died. I turned to Jess and I was like, I don't remember the ending being so dark, do you? And she was like, nope. And then when he reappears, you're like, oh, he's okay.
The thing is, the reveal of him being okay is about a minute later in the movie, so therefore I remembered it. Because I was always a minute ahead of the movie.
Yeah.
If there'd have been a bigger gap between the two, Chris, I'd have spent some time going, fucking hell, they killed that dog.
Yeah.
So, this is mental. This is actually insane. Every single trailer for this movie, well, nearly every single trailer for this movie, spoils the plot point of Lady and the Tramp having puppies at the end of the film.
You're kidding.
Nope.
Fucking hell.
That must all be related to the way that they approach story back then, which is like, oh no, it has to be a story you already know or you won't come and see it. So
that's ridiculous. Well, that spoils the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Different sensibilities at the time. The young pup at the end that's clearly Tramp, like the one that looks like Tramp of their pups, was called Scamp, and he's been featured in a few children's books, a syndicated daily comic strip, full comic books, and then starred in the straight-to-video sequel, Lady and the Tramp 2: Scamp's Adventure. That was in 2001. And then I've got the last piece of trivia. This was just a little bit of note on how the filmmakers saw the two fight scenes. So they actually wanted to approach the two fight scenes very differently in this movie. For the scene with Tramp fighting the strays, they wanted it to feel more like a schoolyard scuffle, one that Tramp doesn't take too seriously. So, you get shots of him like growling and being confident, but no point does he look scared. And no longer the focus is on Lady being scared, not Tramp. Right? Tramp's very confident in that moment. They treated the battle towards the end as more of a with the rat as a battle to the death. It's more clear that Tramp is being visibly hurt. Than in the other scene. So that was the approach they took with the two. They wanted the two fights to feel very different. So there you go. Lady and the Tramp. We did it. We got there.
Nice. Where are we going next, Dan?
Well. I tell you what, in the past, I have gone back and forth with a choice. I have never gone back and forth on a choice as much as I have with this one. Because the movie I wanted to choose fits in nicely with the movies we've just watched. But we have made a habit on this show of doing zigzagging to different stuff once we've done a couple of things. So we just did a couple of animated movies. So the next movie isn't going to involve animation at all.
Did you want it to, then?
The movie I nearly chose did, yes.
What was that?
Well, I'm saving that. We're going to come back to it. So I'm not going to spoil that now.
I was going to make a guess.
Go on.
Was it Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
You're not far off.
Okay.
Yeah, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was definitely a very serious contender this week. It was already... Because I have a list of about 100 movies. And basically, the more I want to watch a movie, the more I move it up the list, like physically put it higher in the list. So the top 4 or 5 on this list are the ones we're probably most likely to get to. Next, in which order is a bit random. That depends how I'm feeling and what I feel like we should be watching. But most of the movies we've discussed so far are on this list quite high, right? There were 2 that were right at the top this week. One was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I think we should come back to that very soon. I'm very excited to show you that movie, because I don't believe you've seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
No, I don't. No.
I
haven't.
The movie I'm going to choose instead is a comedy. It is a live-action movie. It's not necessarily aimed at kids, but it is reasonably family-friendly. I'm choosing it based on the fact that when I think about movies I want to show you, Chris, specifically, I don't. You may have already seen this one. If you have, then we'll get something very different out of it next week. But we've talked about in the past, the films we remember most fondly. This is the film from my childhood that I think is probably the best, objectively. This might be the closest thing to a perfect script that I've ever seen executed. Any guesses based on that?
No. I mean, I know obviously RoboCop, but we've done that, has that reputation, but no, go on.
Next week, we are going to be reviewing Groundhog Day.
Oh, yeah, no, I've watched it recently, in fact. So,
have you actually?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, I think you have said that before about Groundhog Day. I should have been able to guess that. I've watched it in this house, but I'm happy to watch it again.
Did you watch it as a child, or is this just something you saw recently?
No, I saw it at uni, I think. Right. I don't even know. I think uni. I saw it late, but I saw it on your recommendation, and then I rewatched it recently.
How recently is recently? Have I?
No, it's fine. Honestly, not recently. Not like the other week. I saw it I'd say within the last 6 months. But I know I'm more than happy. Also, I think it's Groundhog Day. It's part of the. If there's any movie to keep rewatching.
Yeah,
I'm gutted. I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed I didn't guess that because I've heard you say that about Groundhog Day before.
Yeah, it's for me. It is genuinely as close to a perfect script as you're ever going to get, and I think that when I look back at the films I loved in my childhood, so many of them are flawed. I love them, and I will probably love them till forever. They mean a lot for me for various reasons. But the one that I watched over and over again that is objectively flawless, and I would hear nothing bad against it, is Groundhog Day.
Oh, good. I look forward to if I have negative opinions.
Yeah, no, feel free. I'll have that. I'll have the debate, but I'd be very surprised if you convince me. It genuinely does. Every time I watch it, I think a lot of that
is emotional bias as well from what you're saying, which is you're acknowledging that. So
yeah. Well, that's the thing is though. I think when I go back to all the films that I know, but the thing is, there's so many films from my childhood I know I love, but that they're flawed. If we look back at the films we've done on this very podcast, I know Gremlins is flawed. I love it. I love it to death. It's flawed. Short Circuit is unquestionably flawed, but I love it. So there are a lot of that. A Goofy Movie does have its flaws. I love it. Whereas I genuinely think this might be a flawless movie. Which I'm asserting a certain amount of objective to that opinion that I don't usually assert, because I normally go, well, look, these are movies from my childhood. This one I think is both. I think I happen to have a lot of that childhood nostalgia because I did love this movie, but I do dearly think I think on an academic level this might be close to perfect. So yeah, there you go.
Cool. There we go. Very
excited.
And interestingly presents a logical route for me the week after. But yeah,
interesting. Cool. Interesting. And then maybe a little tease. Maybe we will just maybe I'll just do the predictable thing, and the week after we'll do Roger Rabbit. Have you seen Roger Rabbit?
No. I own it on DVD because someone, I think it was Sophie, got a friend who Dan also knows, had got so fed up of me not having it and not having seen it that they brought it for me on DVD.
Sure, fuck it. I won't tell you what. Obviously, we won't know what's going to go in the week after with Chris's. But I'm gonna. Fuck it. I'm gonna commit to it now. I think I'm gonna say Roger Rabbit for the week after.
Okay, cool. Well, we won't. Yeah, we won't spoil mine then. But that notion of pick the emotive choice that you just loved. I mean, I'm gonna give my choice away to you at least. But there's an option we've been avoiding that I think maybe it's time to open up.
Ah, yes, please. Yes.
The difficulty with that, I mean, now I am just going to give it away. The difficulty with that is more than any other film with sequels. I feel like that's something where, we can wait for Short Circuit 2. I don't know if it's best to wait for the sequel to that movie.
You know what? Well, let's not give it away outright. Let's let people guess, although I think they can figure it out. I honestly think there's a chance that if you choose that movie, there's a chance I could follow it up with the sequel.
Yeah, I think so, because I kind of, I mean, now we're really, but I kind of want to, whether the sequel's repetition makes or breaks it is an interesting thing I'm looking to explore. I'm keen to explore.
Okay, so tell you what, we're not going to name the movie, but there's a chance that we may not even get to Roger Rabbit, because if Chris chooses that movie next week at the end of our Groundhog Day episode, stay tuned. I'm pretty confident what I will choose is its sequel.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. Cool. There we go. In that case,
yeah, thanks very much for listening. Hope you guys all enjoyed it. Stick with us. There's more of this coming. What we may do is take a break when we get to around 10. Although theoretically, if that is true, now we're probably gonna take a break at 11.
Yeah, because this is 7, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but either way, I'm very excited. So yeah, so we're thinking about maybe in future doing these as little sets of sort of 10-ish episodes, and then sort of taking a small break and then coming back, rather than just making it a rolling thing. It allows us to sort of take a break, recharge, maybe record a couple ahead before we come back. Seems to have worked reasonably well so far. So maybe that will be the pattern, or maybe we'll just be ahead and we'll just keep recording them and keep releasing them. I'm not 100% sure, but that is kind of what we're thinking.
Yeah, we've not worked out.
But yeah, as always, youtube.com/NothingButStatic UK. Give us a subscribe. Give us a like. Tell a friend. You can review us on iTunes and all the usual places, Spotify, all that stuff. You can give us lots of thumbs ups and stars and all the various things. You can get us on Patreon, where you can hear episodes of this a week early. In fact, hell, you want to hear our Groundhog Day discussion right now? Patreon.com/NothingButStatic. You'll be able to hear the Groundhog Day episode right now.
Definitely. Cool. There we go. I'm Chris Billingham.
I'm Dan Dillon.
And this review has been rewound.